Our speaker, Craig McLean, is currently serving as the acting chief scientist and will act, and he also acts as the assistant administrator for Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, one of the line offices that you just saw referred to in the previous talk. In his role at OAR, he is responsible for overseeing, directing, and implementing NOAA's research enterprise, including a network of research laboratories and the execution of NOAA programs, including the Climate Program, the National Sea Grant Program, Ocean Exploration, to name a few. Among a number of formal international engagements in science and technology, Mr. McLean serves as the U.S. representative to the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, IOC, and as the co-chair of the U.S.-European Union Marine Working Group. Mr. McLean has previously served in NOAA as the acting deputy assistant administrator of the National Ocean Service and was the founding director of OAR's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research, and served in uniform for nearly 25 years in NOAA's Commission Corps, attaining the rank of captain. Mr. McLean served aboard hydrographic, oceanographic, and fisheries research ships, and was the first commanding officer of the NOAA ship Gordon Gunter. Craig led NOAA's innovation and planning for the Smithsonian Institute's Sant Ocean Hall and achieved a National Ocean Action Plan goal of securing a permanent dedicated ship for the National Ocean Exploration Program, NOAA ship Oceanus Explorer. Craig is also an attorney and has practiced marine resource law for NOAA. He has been awarded the Department of Commerce silver and bronze medals, the NOAA Corps Commendation Medal, and Special Achievement Medal. Mr. McLean is a fellow of the Explorers Club and the Marine Technology Society, and a past president and chairman of the Sea Space Symposium. Not normally included in his bio is another one of his very, very important international portfolio items, and that is Craig is known by some to skillfully navigate political unrest in foreign nations, in particular Indonesia, something that I got to witness firsthand. Ladies and gentlemen, Craig McLean.
Dr. Robinson, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And you bring a smile and a streak of pride to me in recollecting our experience in Indonesia. And I might be able to just impart that with some opening comments that I would like to share before I dive into the slides here, if that's okay. I'd like to take a step back and recognize the importance of the education partnership that we have in NOAA and the objective that we have, which is to increase the richness of our skillful workforce by increasing diversity. And for a long time, we've talked about it, but I think we're at a juncture here where we're really able to, and are clearly committed to, do something about it and to be more aggressive in the way that we look to enrich our workforce. And that's the message I'd like to convey to you. I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining to you a bit about the Oceans and Atmospheric Research Enterprise, but I think you've had some of that already. But if I can digress now, take a step back, I just want to double check. Dr. Robinson, I'm assuming my face is visible at this point in time, correct? To
Yes.
the attendees? Yes, okay. So as you could look at me, ladies and gentlemen, students and faculty and educators, I'm a white male. And if I look around at the student body of many of the Educational Partnership Program faculty and students, we're projecting ourselves to facilitate opportunities for greater diversity and generally embracing minorities. And with minorities usually would then come the characterization of people of color. And I would affirm for you that my heritage has been in this country far more recently than most of you. My father was born in Scotland. My mother's parents were born in Sicily. I do make that distinction. I'm not Italian, I'm Sicilian. But nonetheless, if you're a fan of Sopranos, or if you're a fan of any of the other exciting tales of the New York, New Jersey area, I kind of grew up in and around all of that. But I'm a recent arrival to this country. Never mind the generations that some of our brethren who are part of this conversation might have been in this United States. But this country was waiting for me, even though I've only recently gotten here. And I find it as, honestly, an unearned privilege when I recognize, and when I did recently hear some of the heart-wrenching stories of life's experience of my workmates who happen to be people of color. And when I considered that, I realized that life has been very different for me as a white male than it has been for many others. And I just want to share that sense of awareness that many of my colleagues in NOAA, who happen to be Caucasian and male, which are the dominant components of our workforce, but that our sensitivity has been enlightened and heightened by people like Dr. Robinson when he was with us as the Assistant Secretary for Observation and Prediction at NOAA, brought his leadership, brought his insight, and brought an awakening awareness to us of really how we could be a better organization. And for that, then, we've expanded our reach. People like Vice Admiral Manson Brown, who followed Dr. Robinson in that position, brought in a sense of awareness that furthered our understanding. And Vice Admiral Brown was one of the first African Americans in the United States Coast Guard Academy. So the changes that we want to achieve are well guided by expert people who have clearly the technical proficiencies, but have also had those life's experiences that really help us realize how we can be a better agency, a better organization. And I'll point to your host of the last session, Dr. Danae Carlis, someone who I've worked with very, very closely. I see the promise of our future in people like Danae Carlis, who I hope is ready to start preparing himself. He's already preparing himself. I hope that Danae comes and takes my job next time around. I think we have such talent in our ranks, and people like Lonnie Gonzalez and looking at Jeanette Davis and her eDNA presentation, there are a lot of folks that we have in our inventory that are quite prepared to bring excellence to a new level in this agency. So with that, I'll offer you the sense that you never really know where you're going to end up, but you have to have a plan. So for me, I never really knew how I was going to find a career in the ocean sciences because there really wasn't a lit pathway. And I'm hoping that we, with the Educational Partnership Program and also with the engagement of NOAA graduates of the program, but also non-graduates that are in NOAA that reach into these programs, can help you find that pathway. But I got to tell you, Dr. Robinson mentioned an expert trip that we had taken to Indonesia. And we were in an armored State Department sport utility vehicle, a parade of, I believe it's 2 or 3 vehicles. There was a follow-up car, a lead car, and then we were in a middle car. And there was some significant consternation, that's perhaps the best way I could describe it, over an election result. And that election result involved one group of folks stealing the election ballot box and taking them to their own district to count the votes because they disagreed with what the outcome was. Dr. Robinson and I were working with the State Department folks. We had plan A, we had plan B, and we had plan C in the event that the military trucks that we saw passing us by as we were stopped with traffic not moving except to allow the military vehicles to go ahead, as to should we head for the woods? Do we stay in the car? Do we have enough food and matter that we could take with us in order to have nutrition if we have to spend the night in the woods? I mean, we were really thinking, what could possibly happen here? And after going through that experience, I never thought that I would find myself in such a unique circumstance as Dr. Robinson and I and others did in our experience in Indonesia. But then I jumped to January 6th and the storming of the Capitol building in our own country. And I too never thought that I would see that. So as I offer to you these rather unimaginable circumstances, the things that we probably never thought we were going to see, we are scientists. We start taking data, we ingest that data, we analyze that data, we see what's happening in and around us. And with that, I see executive orders that speak to equity and that speak to diversity, inclusion. I see a government that is transforming itself in a manner that is remarkable in just such a short time after an election. I see a pathway that is lighting up of opportunity for everyone on equal footing with equal preparation and letting excellence soar to a point where I am very optimistic of how our agency and our federal workforce is going to blossom into something that we know we can achieve, which is to reach even farther than we have so far. So I see this as an opportunity and part of what I wanted to communicate to you, because in general, as a white male conveying my thoughts and my encouragement and cheering you on, there's a relevance behind that comes with what my experience has been, although it will never match every student's experience. We are all unique, we're all individuals. But if the success that I've enjoyed in my career, without having an absolute plan at the start of my career, can be shared with you, I want to let you see that. So for example, can you imagine in your career that you would find some pretty cool stuff sitting in the ocean bottom, like a late 1700s, early 1800s jug? Or let's go fast forward to the next century. You come across a rum runner during the age of Prohibition, about 100 years ago during Prohibition, and a case of whiskey bottles that still had the corks in them and still had whiskey in them. And as part of official duties, I can affirm for you that the whiskey was not very good, but it had been on the seabed for far too long. But in looking at those types of adventures, I always wanted to have them, but I found them in a career with NOAA. I also found the opportunity in a legal background to generate publications that spoke to social science and the value of social policy, wisely informed by science. And that's what we really try to do. So I appreciate Dr. Gonzalez's comment earlier, where he was reminding folks that social science is a part of what we would like to cultivate through the educational partnership as well. It's not just the physical, the biological, and the more traditional interpretations of science. So all are welcome. We want to encourage you to become part of our community even more so than you are now. And now let me dive in a little bit to show you why I'm optimistic about how your path can be perhaps easier lighted than mine was. Not trying to compare the fact that my path started in the late 70s, early 80s. Life and the world was a little bit different then, but where we have an opportunity now. So if I can have the next slide, please. Sorry, one more again, please. This really touches me, and I know that it's rather universally accepted, but the responsibility that we have, given the careers that we have chosen, is to really look out for not just our children, but I'm 63 years old. I'm a grandfather. And when I look in the eyes of my grandchildren, I realize that they're increasingly aware of what I do at work. And my greatest hope is that when I finish my work, that they look up and say, you know, I think the old man did okay, rather than, gosh, he was in an interesting position. I wish he had tried harder, because we really do owe it to our children, to our grandchildren, to be providing them with something better than we inherited. And yeah, indeed, we are borrowing that future from our children. We need to do the best we can now. And that's why you're in the courses, and that's why you're in the curricula and the programs that you're in. You share that passion. I embrace you for that. And I want to see you thrive and do very well in your careers so that we can do the best we can for the next generations. So with context, next slide, please. When I started, well, let me just offer to you for this. I've been a diver since I was 14 years old. I got a job chipping barnacles in a boatyard that was next to my house. We were on the back side of town. The people who had more means lived on the top side of town. But I grew up on what was called the Passaic River. Actually, it's still called the Passaic River. And actually, it's still one of the 10 most polluted rivers in the country. But here, if you've ever gone 95 north, driving from, well, any place, north or south, if you've crossed the Delaware Bridge on Route 95, this is me on the bridge abutment of the Route 95 transitway. And I'm inspecting some underwater structures that were part of protecting that bridge. You can look at the color of that water. It's about the same as weak tea, maybe strong tea. And this is definitely not the tropics. This is definitely not luxurious diving. But this is where I started. And I never thought that I would ever have the opportunity to become the commanding officer of NOAA ships, or that I would ever have the opportunity to become a senior executive in a government agency, much less NOAA. But always be ready. You never know where your opportunities and where your life will lead you. So always be ready. Next slide, please. And by the way, that job did not pay a whole lot. Okay, so let's review NOAA from a slightly different context. We know that the National Marine Fisheries Service, a major part of NOAA that you've heard from, asks these very high order, almost ecclesiastical scaled questions. How many fish are in the sea? NOAA has to answer this question every day. National Marine Fisheries Service looks out for how many fish there are and how we protect that ecosystem and understand that ecosystem that they live in. Next question of what NOAA does every day. Next slide, please. What is the weather going to be like tomorrow? That's our National Weather Service. That's a very important mission. We're in touch with every American every day through this means. Next slide, please. Well, we take weather and then we protract the scale. Never mind the weather tomorrow, but what the weather is going to be like 10, 50, 100, many years from now. This is climate. And climate is very important. NOAA has been performing climate science and defining climate science since we were formed in 1970. In fact, it was our instruction from both the Congress and the planning document that was led by the Stratton Commission, if you're a student of marine policy, back in 1968, 69, and implemented in 1970. And we were told to study the interaction between the atmosphere and the ocean. And I know many of you do, and you continue that study. But what started as an ocean and atmospheric study became known as climate science. And that's where we are today with very certain knowledge of human causation and now just the leading edge of what alternatives do we have? How do we mitigate? How do we adapt? How can we make our lifestyle robust, economically prosperous, and not damage our future, but truly be sustainable? So what will the weather be like tomorrow? Next question, or next slide, please. Thank you. The last one, which gets back to what Dr. Gonzalez was sharing with you, but are we wise to build on shifting sands? And many of you, I think, can appreciate the relationship of that statement. But truly, coastal zone management and making the coasts resilient, whether it be by naturally occurring events or naturally occurring events that are exacerbated and amplified because of the impact and influence of climate change. So we're very busy with this inside of NOAA. Next slide, please. It's exciting work. It's collecting a wonderful group of people that are really concentrating on weather, oceans, and climate. And that's our mainstream of what we have. I think you've had an opportunity to see that we have ships and planes and many field activities. We also have laboratories that enrich the study and understanding of each of these subjects. But we're very interested in where and how we can incorporate and recruit you as students to come into our being and our agency. Next slide, please. So inside of oceans and atmospheric research, the one part of NOAA, and as you saw earlier with the organizational diagram, we are one of the 5 line organizations. And our vision is simple: to deliver the future. And the mission, you can see it written here, but our purpose is to serve each of the other line organizations with an over-the-horizon view for what needs to be done and how we can do it. The image here I'm very proud of. This is our Deep Discoverer robotic vehicle. It's about the size of an early Ford Explorer, and it can dive to 6,000 meters, and it has probably the best, if not one of the best, around the world optical and lighting systems. We've actually used that system to publish a new species without collecting a reference specimen. But the photo optics and the number of images that were gathered were successful and sufficient in order to be verified by peer review of the definition of a new species of ctenophore. Next slide, please. So this is boring stuff, but in terms of an organization's character and a statement of itself, what is our strategy? What do we really focus on? And inside of the NOAA research community, we want to explore and understand the marine environment and know how to use it well, not damage it. We want to detect changes in the ocean and the atmosphere. That ranges from fisheries to weather, same with making forecasts better, and then to drive innovation. Once again, we're the over-the-horizon people. In terms of our values, I would like you to see that the first one up, and this was written some time ago, but the first one up is our commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity. Upholding scientific integrity is very important for us. We're also and often the stewards of scientific integrity in NOAA. Perhaps during the Q&A, I'd be happy to answer any questions on that, but you know that we did have some trouble with scientific integrity over the last 4 years. I think the current president's memorandum on scientific integrity really makes clear that that problem is not going to happen, at least for the next 4 years. But how do we really work to make sure it doesn't happen again at all? And that's another subject I'd like to get to if we have time. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in looking at the various vision areas of not OAR, but NOAA overall, We have areas of research that look at, as you could see, reducing societal impact. We know what's coming. We just don't know exactly where and when. A few days out, we do. A few seasons out, we're getting better at. Second area, looking at sustainable use and stewardship of the resources. I think that's very much right in line with the studies of most of your work, whether you're working satellites, whether you're working atmospheric science, but certainly in the ocean science. And then last is a robust research enterprise that actually doesn't study science for the sake of science or for curiosity-driven science, but along the mission areas that NOAA has of weather, of climate, and of oceans. Next slide, please. I'm delighted to see, as a tax-paying citizen, the direction that the current administration is taking here. And we start looking at finally addressing in a meaningful way the climate crisis, and it indeed is a crisis. And we have several presidential actions that have really brought that into focus, and NOAA is front and center on these. And of course, I'll mention as well in the center, the memorandum on restoring trust in government science, and also trust in government and science, and also for scientific integrity. So these are very important to have an executive order, which actually it's not a law. An executive order is something that any president can write, and it provides instruction to the entire executive branch. It doesn't reach beyond the executive branch, but in ways it might by the interpretation of regulations that exist or the policies that the president would like to see achieved in implementing laws that are passed by Congress. So it doesn't create new law, but it guides our conduct, and very much do we have climate front and center on the screen right now. Next slide, please. That's been rather refreshing after the past 4 years where climate was certainly suppressed, if you will, in terms of our ability to reference it, although the Congress continued to give us sufficient funding that we never lost the ability to make the investments necessary. So tackling the climate crisis, check, you see that. In terms of providing opportunities and protecting public health and the environment, that's not just COVID, but certainly includes COVID, but advancing racial equity and the equitable basis of providing services from our agency is very important to us. And of course, scientific integrity. So with these priorities, plus all of the laws that underpin and define NOAA's mission of fisheries, of coastal environment and coastal resilience and management, of weather forecast and prediction, of climate science, put all this together, and these are very, very important in terms of realizing this is a time and a season of opportunity. Next slide, please. So speaking of those opportunities, and once again, I can't help but show you our Deep Discoverer robotic vehicle. I would like now to turn to where you might see those opportunities, where you could fashion your road, your design, your plan. Unanticipating things are going to pop in front of you, but so may many of those be opportunities that help you on the course you're on. Next slide, please. I'd like to mention that the current workforce in NOAA is facing a retirement wave, which, as someone who might be looking to enter the federal workforce, in particular inside of NOAA, this is really good news. To a certain extent, it scares me because a lot of our very experienced scientists are retirement eligible and will be leaving in certainly the next few years. But at the same time, I look at the talent that we have in our organization, and you've heard from much of that talent through the course of these presentations these past 2 days. So I know that good people are coming, but let me ask you a question that I'm not sure I'm going to have the answer to hear how you see it, but might anyone know the average age of the people who were in the control room when the Apollo set down on the moon, and Aldrin and Armstrong went for their exploratory journey on the moon? The average age in the control room was 28 years old. I ask you now today, what do we ask 28-year-old people to do when people like me at 63 are sitting in senior positions on top of agencies? I'm going to guess that you don't need 63 years of experience to do what I do. And we certainly don't want 28-year-olds to be running about just collecting specimens and not really applying their intellect to the full challenge and the opportunity. We can do better, and we will do better. So I think the retirement eligibility inside our agency is a positive signal for any students that are looking for where they might want to go with their career. You don't have to be log jammed to get in. Next is the NOAA Commission Corps. I had a rich career of 1 month short of 25 years in the NOAA Corps. It provided me with seagoing experience, underwater experience, program management experience. And I think the NOAA Corps is something that many students that are part of our educational partnership program would be well rewarded to be looking into. It's an opportunity for adventure, opportunity for training, and it was through the NOAA Corps that I was able to go to law school. So it's something that I would like to put on your radar and let you see where the opportunities are. I'm going to move on down through these pretty quickly, but recognizing that these opportunities ahead speak to an optimistic season. And I'm very excited for you, particularly the students that are undergrads and certainly the graduate students, for what is in front of you, because this is a season of opportunity. Next subject, or next slide, please. So here's one for you. And if you haven't taken it or seen it yet, go ahead and let's leave the slide up for a minute. But please take your camera on your cell phone or your iPhone and just blast this and then dive in a little bit deeper, because the programs that I'm going to show you here, you've already heard something about, but what social scientists tell me is if you mention something 3 or 4 times, not everyone picks it up. If you get at it 7 times or more, people definitely get it. And so you probably have seen these already, but I want you to look at them and realize we have a number of programs inside of NOAA that provide opportunities for students to be further engaged in our enterprise so that you can get to know who the officials are or the people who may be the hiring official in a position. I would certainly encourage you to be exploring these, working through the NOAA education program. These are all registered and identifiable through the icon that's mentioned or that we're showing to you right here. So please take a look at that and use these, utilize these, and profit from them. Next slide, please. The climate change challenge that's in front of us is certainly daunting, but it's one that is well understood. And we have room for more science, and we have room for the people who would be looking at what some of the solutions are based on what the science tells us. None of these are a mystery. I think these are all apparent and you're already studying. My point is that what you're studying is very relevant to what we need inside of our agency and beyond, inside of government, state level, federal level, in NOAA, other agencies. So your preparation is sound for what is a timely challenge and a timely crisis. Next slide, please. I want to tell you a good story about equitable delivery of services, and that's certainly a title that the president has included in one of his executive orders. But I'll go now to Sea Grant in Virginia, where several years ago, a modest grant, as you can see here, a $50,000 grant, was put together with Virginia Sea Grant, and it involved universities in and around Norfolk, Virginia, Old Dominion University among them, and several others. And the idea here was to recognize that certain zip codes do not necessarily have the community wealth in order to provide the engineering assessment and solutions for what is a rising high water mark. We have moon tides in Virginia. We have coastal flooding events that are driven by many aspects. A complicated series of events drive these tides, but truly through subsidence and also through sea level rise, we have a problem. And wealthier neighborhoods could probably take care of their own engineering studies, but those areas of a lesser economy were the focus of this activity and trying to address in underserved communities an opportunity to attain coastal resilience. So with a $50,000 grant from Sea Grant, with contributions and intellect and students from Old Dominion University, a study was put together, and having that study, the community was then able to compete for a grant under FEMA, resulting in a $120 million grant to the community. And that money is still being utilized today. It's being leveraged today, and it continues to provide solutions to not just that particular neighborhood where the people who live in the neighborhood were part of the work and are being hired and continue to be hired in order to do the work, but many of those young students who are high school age have gone on now through college and graduate school and have become practitioners in these subjects. So this is what we're talking about in terms of dealing with and addressing equitable distribution of services and dealing with the correction of underserved communities to make them fully served, as every American and every community deserves. May I have the next slide, please? So we're committed to that type of work inside of NOAA. Now, I showed you where some of the educational extension opportunities might be with these programs. Some are repeated here, but I want to shift now to hiring. So there are direct hiring opportunities here inside of NOAA. We've been given recent increased authorities by the Congress to use them. And for you as a student to be taking advantage of those student experiences from the previous slide, and then getting to know the people who may be the direct hiring officials, there's an opportunity. That's a strategic approach for you to get engaged, get involved, and get to know some of the people who have the positions of responsibility to interview and to hire. Obviously, dealing with minority serving institutions and outreach, we want to see an extension, and I love seeing where we can achieve it, that NOAA experienced employees in either social science or in physical and biological sciences can be joined as scientists, as adjunct faculties in the cooperative science centers. That's another way that students are going to get exposed to the people who have influence on hiring. The Sea Grant community engagement I mentioned, but the Sea Grant program has a lot of opportunity. I think also looking at the careers that the Sea Grant Extension Service provides, where people educated at a master's or PhD level are in communities, hearing from communities what their needs are, dealing with or addressing the science, and delivering results to the community in a very plain spoken, understandable way, rather than a science paper. When communities have challenges that they want to deal with, they need communication that could be dealt with at all levels of understanding rather than a credentialed scientist's manner of speech. So this is a wonderful program. I encourage you to look into that as well. All right, next slide, please then. Now let's go internationally. This very confusing piece on the right-hand side almost looks like a chip from a mineral, but it's actually an ocean-centric southern hemisphere view of the world. And if you look at that, you could really come to appreciate that the land mass is just but 30%, and the ocean really is 70%. And I think it's a fantastic representation, but it reminds me, and it's a good communication vehicle, to remind you of the global approach to the subjects that we've been speaking of, and the Sustainable Development Goals developed by the United Nations that are to be achieved by design by the year 2030. There's a lot of work ahead. Multiple nations around the globe are working on it, and oceans find themselves right in the middle of it, literally and figuratively. Next slide, please. So it makes your work relevant at a domestic and an international scale. Now, something that I've been working on for the past 3 years is the UN Decade of Ocean Science. I've been on an executive planning group, and now I'm on the board that is joined by 19 others, 5 Americans, and the rest come from countries around the world. And we're developing this ocean science in order to deliver the ocean we need for the future we want. And the UN Decade of Ocean Science actually has a longer title. It is the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. We recognize that many economies around the world, many cultures and communities around the world are achieving the conveniences of what will be developed into the more casual title of a middle-class existence. And if we do see these economies develop with the same recklessness that we practiced in the 60s and the 70s, where we didn't pay any mind to the byproduct of our prosperity and the waste products we generated while producing the convenience products that we enjoyed. In other words, to move from a linear economy to a circular economy where byproducts are having themselves utilization components that are adding to society's value rather than to trash dumps and trash heaps. So we're really pushing this Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. That too is an opportunity. It's going to, obviously for a decade, it's going to be around for 10 years and be a very strong billboard of public attention for the importance of the oceans, ocean science, and the reasons why we produce this ocean science. So the next slide, please, then we'll continue. There are certain strategic objectives in the decade. These would be pretty logical because if you've attended or followed any of the global conferences or global definitions of problems, they're very logical. We want to be transformative and not just continue science as it has been on a literal path. We want to be leapfrogging. We want to be looking at expanding knowledge of the oceans, but for application and purposes, for what the impacts of mineral mining might be, what the impacts of climate change are inside of the ocean. We often look just at the surface, the 30%, but the changes that are taking place in the oceans are often 10 times faster in measurement than what is taking place on land in terms of ecosystem disruption. We need to bring that to visibility and into the minds of policymakers. So these other attainable objectives here are something very important for you to consider, and perhaps you see yourself in them. I certainly do. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this one because it's probably unnecessary to get into the details here, but we'll just move on to the next slide. Suffice to say that there is a mechanism of how the science will move with and through and to society for meaningful purposes and outcomes. But I'll conclude the decade of ocean science here by saying that inside the United States, we have a domestic strategy of engagement where we want communities engaged. We want participation of a diversity of interests and a diversity of the community to be part of this UN Decade of Ocean Science. It will start with what we're terming as the co-development of objectives, much like that Sea Grant program was, where the community had voice and said, we need to know what we can do about these floods. And where science came in and said, we will provide you with an option and solutions for that flooding situation, and we'll design it and we'll engineer it for you. And then, fortunately, the larger grant was available and things turned to prosperity. Then lastly, in terms of this partnership in support of the Decadal Vision, this slide I do enjoy because those are two teachers at sea, which is yet another program that we run in NOAA, where we provide an opportunity for educators to have experience on NOAA ships. Now, of course, with COVID, we've had to stand down on much of that activity by inviting guests out on board, but that's something very much important for us to return to. And as our ships do return to sea in a normal seagoing year, the opportunity for educational experiences for students to get out on ships, as I did in 1978 and 79, that put a spark in my mind so that when I joined the NOAA Corps in 1981, I already had an ambition in mind as to what I was looking to achieve. So now with the next slide. I'd like to come in for a little bit of conclusion here, not to forget the socioeconomic or the social sciences. That is very important. That is very much a piece of what we are needing and what we look for. You've probably heard a few presentations on that already. I would trust that you have, but really looking at the value of applying the science and making sure that the communities and the public understands what that science is meaning is very important. So let us not be singularly looking at the physical, the biological, the chemical sciences. We're also looking for the social sciences, and we need your participation there as well. Next slide, please. All right, so we're getting ready with a new generation of ocean enthusiasts as part of where we're going with the Ocean Decade. Want you to be part of that. This is a little bit of a teaser, but stand by for June. There'll be more coming, and hopefully you'll have a Gen O t-shirt on and be part of, whether it's with NOAA or whether it's the UN Decade activities and some of the science with it, that you'll be part of it. So next slide, please. This is the COVID reminder. The world will be a little bit different, but one of the things we're looking at is whether or not people who work in one particular location have to live in that location. Telecommuting has taught us a lot. You've been studying through telecommuting. You've also been studying at times, I would imagine, inside of your traditional classrooms. But when COVID relaxes, our working world's going to be a lot more flexible. That's something also for you to look forward to. Next slide, please. I'm going to close here with something that I've used in other talks, and I hope it doesn't appear to be too burdensome, but I've got this list of 12 suggestions of maxims and precepts for what benefited me in my career, and I hope it does for you. You'll find yourself in new circumstances, whether it's Dr. Robinson and I sitting on the roadside in a State Department vehicle wondering whether we're going to see any military engagement take place or not. But you have many choices in life. You need to consider what's right. Just do what's right. Don't overthink it. And rely on that sense of common sense and reasonableness that has gotten you this far in your life and in your career. If you're a team leader, be part of the team. You don't always have to lead the team, but you can lead from within. I tell the folks that I'm responsible for, I'm so proud of you. I wear your jersey. I'm your fan, and I mean it. In terms of where you might choose or find yourself working, if you're in a micromanagement environment, you probably want to work to change that. You need to trust people. And by golly, I have always tried to avoid micromanagement. I don't think I've ever been burned by it. You will get much farther by trusting your people than by trying to think for them. Life is a team sport. Get in the game and play hard. Work with teams. Choose your mentors wisely, and maybe also let them choose you. It's a relationship, and finding that co-minded alliance is very important in a mentorship relationship. You can't choose mentors well remotely or with or blindly, I guess is a better way to put it. Okay, join professional societies. If you're not a member of a professional society, I strongly encourage you to do so and network within that society. The people who are in these communities are mindful of helping develop careers, and they are ready and there to help you. That's not all a society does, but that's a major piece of the advantage. Next one, take risks, volunteer, jump into those leadership roles, gain that experience, be known as that person that people can go to for the reliable delivery of opportunities. And here now, when talking about not knowing where you wind up, when you sense you have a plan, when you sense you have a direction, seek that direction. Take your dream, take your ambition, and build it brick by brick with a firm foundation, and then put your house, your career, your vision on top of that. But make sure that every step you take is reinforcing that journey, and you're putting those bricks down one step at a time. Build constituency for your ideas, your dreams, your vision. Recruit people to understand it and help you attain it. By them knowing where you want to go, people can help you get there, whether they're mentors or just folks that you casually meet who are concerned for your welfare and advancement. That's certainly the mindset, and that's certainly the character of the people that we have in NOAA. Okay, one thing I'm willing to talk about later in the Q&A if we have time for it, but know your own limits and pick your battles carefully. You have to stand for what you believe in, but I learned a very important lesson in about mid-career. It is not important to win every single battle. It's important to win the ones that really count. Last two, never, never tolerate a bully. That's all I could say about that. Lastly, if you're going to be aspiring to a position of leadership, you need to be prepared to lead. Leaders lead, whether it's in the title of their position or not. And I know that I'm talking to quite a few leaders right now. So I'll conclude right there, and I'll say thank you very much for listening. And it's been my delight to join you here. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Craig. That was really outstanding. And I'm sure it's been well received by our participants this afternoon. I want to first get a sense for time. Dr. White, from you, how much time do we have for quick Q&A?
You have about 9 minutes.
Okay. So Craig, there are a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if you can see those.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can. I could take them in, Dr. Robinson, as they appear. So NOAA's international jurisdiction implies legal authority over certain areas, and international automatically implies that there's not jurisdiction there for certain activities. But Americans in foreign places are still under U.S. jurisdiction, but largely it's our fisheries world that gives us a role to be dealing in the international setting and providing rules and contributing to international agreements. So it's largely in the fisheries world, but I think it's increasingly going to be in the climate world as we look at the likes of the United States rejoining the Paris Agreement. In terms of next subject here, what advice might I give to a graduate student who's having a tough time figuring out what line organization they should apply to? My advice would be to apply to any that interest you. Apply to multiple positions. And one thing I could tell you with confidence about the people inside of NOAA is that NOAA is a people-friendly place. And once you get in and get established, then move around, but land that first position. Don't worry if it's not the perfect position for you. Find a position that can be comfortable for you, get in, and then look around, and then seek an opportunity to move around. Added to that, I wouldn't stay in a position any shorter than 1 year, because you don't want to have an asterisk or a footnote on your resume. You want to get in, get established, and then move around. But I've worked in almost every line organization. They're all amazing. And when you find yourself in a new work environment or maybe a slightly new subject, you assimilate the excitement of that subject, and you'll take the skills you have and apply them in that direction. There's no bad choice. They're all good, and take as many opportunities as you can to apply.
Dr. White, are you going to respond to that question as well? I see you added something to the chat.
I did not. I was just marking it saying that he was answering it live.
Okay, sort of a follow-up to that. Craig, one of the things I noticed with NOAA employees in general, in particular those who are, climbing the ladder to management positions, that they tend to move around. Can you share your insights on that? Because I think that might be a new sort of reality for some students who want to be leaders at NOAA or perhaps any place else.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. I do believe that every one of our senior leaders in NOAA has worked in other parts of NOAA and or other agencies. Very few have been in the same line organization in NOAA and moved all the way up. I would affirm that the only reason I am enjoying the position I have today is because I moved around so much, and I was actually part of a personnel system that compelled me to move around, and that was the NOAA Commission Corps. But diversity of experience is as important as diversity of your educational background, your discipline, of who we are. The richness of diversity is ethnicity, it's part of the country you come from, it's also where you have worked before and what experiences you bring to you. Something I'll offer too is that I think it's pretty astounding when people start crossing disciplines where I was lucky as a science background to go to law school and put those two together. I have seen things that I would not have seen if I didn't have that additional academic preparation. So moving around a lot is very important. But again, you stay for a resident period of time that allows you to accomplish something, not just get something started, and then take that experience and move on to the next. But NOAA is so rich in broad experience and opportunities, ranging from satellites to the bottom of the sea and from atmospheric to oceanic, coastal, weather, all of that. You could have a wonderful time just being a NOAA employee and still satisfy your itch for new challenges.
So there's another question in the chat about navigating research and getting boring. Could you respond to that one, Greg, if you see it?
I must be on the wrong component of the chat. Could you repeat the question, please?
So the question is, how do graduate students navigate research and jobs if they get boring in one place too quickly? I find myself dependent upon my team's energy much more than my own passions.
So there are signals that we each receive for our own contentment. And maybe it's just a lull period, or maybe it's just not the right fit for subject matter and intellectual challenge that this individual or others might find appropriate. So when you start to feel that, you can, number one, what I would always do in my career, if I had a lull period, I'd start something on my own. I would start writing a paper. I would start a project. I would say, I think we need to do something here, and I would get it started. And hopefully I was in an environment that was going to support me for doing that. But then be a self-starter if that happens. If that still doesn't help you reach that level of satisfaction with the subject matter, then start looking around and think, what other subject matter might I be better suited or more comfortable in or feel more challenged in? But don't take time failing to be content, but you've got to give things a little bit of time as well, right? So anything inside of the first year, and you're talking to someone who was absolutely frustrated during my first year at sea, because I thought I was ready to command the vessel as an ensign after scarcely a year on board. Now, of course, that is not sufficient training and time and opportunity to do so. So you have to be tempered a little bit, but hopefully those points are sufficient guidance for you. Take your time, be deliberate, look around, and build team, build community, because your colleagues and friends will help you find the next challenge and the next opportunity once they get to know you well enough in terms of what you're really good at. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. White, do we have time for this last question?
We do. I went ahead and shared my screen so that he can see the last two. There are two more.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So food supply, very definitely NOAA's work in food supply. That's really a very important component of the National Marine Fisheries Service contribution to NOAA. So that definitely is. But then as a secondary application, all of our climate forecasts are used by the agriculture community and even the markets that follow the agricultural productivity. So we're very much involved in that. And looking back after learning so much, what advice would I have given to my younger self or my grandchildren? And the topic is leadership. Okay, I'll go back to my rules of 12, but volunteer, don't be bashful. I was a pretty shy kid when I was younger. You wouldn't get that impression today, but I was. I would have learned a lot more if I was a bit more self-assertive and confident in what I had to offer. And can I talk a little bit more about the NOAA Corps and what they do? The NOAA Corps is one of the 7 uniformed services in the United States government. Everyone knows the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. Few people know the Uniform Public Health Service, but during this pandemic, they've been very much involved in helping to deliver medical relief to many people. But then the 7th one is the NOAA Commissioned Corps. Back a century ago, we used to be called the Coast and Geodetic Survey, and principally the job then was mapping and producing nautical charts. Today, the NOAA Corps serves all of NOAA, from satellites to the bottom of the ocean, and the NOAA Corps runs the fleet of 16 oceanographic research ships that we have, and I forget the number, somewhere around 10 or 12 planes that we have. So we have an aviation wing, we have a seagoing wing, and officers rotate from a land assignment or a ground assignment to seagoing or flight duty. If you're a pilot, you're an aviator. If you're like the rest of the most, you're dealing with ships and land assignments. Among those aviators are the hurricane hunters. That's exciting work. Okay, I'll be greedy. I want to extend this EPP program with MSI to continue because of envy of agencies like NASA. How do we make it a more perfect program? Well, one thing I have to do is tip my hat to NASA, because often we look to NASA in the way that they foster grants and other opportunities, contracts even, in order to promote, actually in order to require diversity and equity. And NASA's ahead of us in that. Now, in terms of other opportunities that NASA has, if you go back in the history and realize what NASA was founded for, it obviously was the space race, but it was to use space not just for military competition, and that really was the majority of the presidents and the congressional intent behind creating NASA and a moonshot, but also space became the vehicle to entice people into STEM. You and I recognize that the oceans and the coastal environment, et cetera, do the same thing. We've just never been given that structure. In fact, while NOAA has an authorizing law that says there shall be a NASA and it shall do the following things, NOAA doesn't have that. NOAA has about 35 laws that tell us to do a piece of our mission here and there. And if we could ever get a NOAA authorization that said, let this agency be a lead in STEM recruitment, much as the way NASA has the authorization to do, I think we'd be a lot farther down the road. I envy NASA. I respect NASA. They really have the tools that I wish we had, which allows us to be more educationally oriented. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. This has been wonderful for me. I hope it's equally enjoyable and informative to our participants on this meeting today. I really, really appreciate you agreeing to give this plenary presentation, Craig, and let's get together in Indonesia one of these days again.
Indeed, Dr. Robinson, it's always a pleasure to be with you. And thank you for your leadership of the institution and the university. But I want to thank everyone in attendance here. And I hope to see you in our laboratories, on our ships, our airplanes, and in our hallways. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for participating, Craig. That was such a good presentation. We learned a lot. And thank you for being a transformative champion for inclusion and diversity and promoting opportunities. Thank you so much. Thank you. So if you have questions, please continue to put them in our Q&A and our chat so that we can get those answers on to you as soon as we can. We just appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Robinson, for working with this wonderful speaker. And we're glad you both made it back from Indonesia without losing a hair. We appreciate that. So at this time, I have another poll, and then I have an opportunity. Dr. White, are we going to have a break? Have we decided to have a break for everyone?
We are going to have a break.
Okay.
So the next session, which are the most important session, our invited student virtual presentations, will begin at 2:30. So following your poll, we will have almost a 30-minute break.